His fire. Let His fire fill your soul. Offer Him what matters most. Lift Him up. Lift Him up. Sing holy, holy.
Lovely to be here. It is the first week of Advent, right? First week of Advent, where we anticipate the arrival of Jesus at Christmas time. Now, this is part of the church calendar. We do this to help focus ourselves. But we should always be in a kind of Advent posture. Always anticipating, always seeking, always waiting for Christ to be incarnate, right? He was incarnate once as Jesus of Nazareth in this glorious explosion of grace into the cosmos. But every day, God's presence is incarnate to us in the creation. Is here, is arriving in people's faces. In Scripture, He comes alive. We should always be waiting and anticipating and searching. So I want to kick week 1 of Advent off, not with the normal Christmassy type thing, but with a meditation on having different sight, on actually starting to think about having different eyes for Christmas. Today we are talking about this, searching for Christ in every person. Has anyone here been to a physio before? A few people have been to, you can tell, middle-aged congregation, you know. We've all been there, probably going to go there more. All right. I've been to a physio a bit. I sympathise because I get a little bit of a bad back, right? And sometimes I go to a physio and I'm often disappointed, right? Because I go to a physio wanting that really big, hard, massage to release all the tension. That's what I want, you know? That's what I'm going for. And often they just give me a set of exercises. You know, and I leave really disappointed. I'm like, I wanted you to get in there with your elbows, and you're like, yeah, you're like, do 3 of these, you know, every day. You're like, come on, I'm paying you for that. And so a month ago I had this. I had 3 visits.
Sorry if there's any physios.
I love your work. I went to a physio 3 weeks in a row, right? And you pay for the visit, and you're expecting this, and they give you some exercises. And you go home, and if you're like me, you don't do them. Never do your exercises the physio gives you. But you book in your appointment the next week, and you go back the next week, and you're hoping for a massage. And she's like, "Did you do the exercises?" And you're, and she's like, "Okay, let's see how you go. What's your progress?" Nothing, because you haven't done it. But you're like, "Just come on." So you go away again, and I came back for a third. This is how stupid I am. I paid for a third appointment, came back, didn't do my exercises, and the physio said, "I don't really know why you're paying me to come here, because you're not putting in the work, you're not doing it." I was like, "You're absolutely right." Sometimes coming to church can be a little bit like that. Sometimes coming to church, we want that real, we want that weekly kick in the guts. Oh yeah, I'm encouraged and that's really good, right? That's what we want. Maybe today I'm not going to give you that. Maybe today I'm going to give you a practice, an exercise. And so for some of you, you might go away from today going, "Oh, ripped off," right? Where was the kaboom? All right? Dean just gave me an exercise and a practice. Well, just like the physio, right? If you put this into practice, what I'm going to tell you today, it's very simple. It's very simple, but it is profound. if you put this into practice, it will change your life. If you don't, that's fine. Come back next week, we'll try it all again. There is one of my, a theologian, Karl Rahner. He's a German Jesuit theologian. German theologians look pretty intense, don't they? He's a pretty serious kind of guy. He says this: the Christian of the future will be a mystic, or he will not exist at all. He said this in the 1980s. Right? The world was entering a time of increased secularism, materialism, nihilism, which basically means all there is in the world is what you can see, what's verifiably provable. There's no real deeper meaning to anything. That's it. At the same time that's happening, religion is ossifying and institutionalizing, becoming something that the common people don't want anymore. And he made this prediction. He said, the Christian of the future will be a mystic, or they will not exist at all. Which I think is kind of interesting. So what's a mystic? When I think of a mystic, I think of someone really mysterious, you know, they're like, oh, I'm so mysterious. That's not what a mystic is. A mystic is not even like a hippie. Up here, you might think of like, oh, there's a lot of mystics around, you know, they've been smoking a bit of stuff down. A mystic's not a hippie or someone super mysterious. A mystic, in the traditional sense, is someone, it could be like him, could be someone quite sensible and serious, but they believe that through prayer and contemplation, it is possible to have a direct experience of God. Now, if you come from more of a Pentecostal tradition, that's not big a surprise. That's the whole idea. We should be able to experience God. But often in Pentecostalism, there's vibrancy and emotion and sound and noise. Mystics are more like monastics. They spend hours in a cave praying and anticipating and experiencing God. A lot of the saints of old were mystics. So there's something here Carl's trying to get us to think that to be a Christian is there's a contemplative aspect where we need new eyes to see God. So as we approach Advent, we're going to need new eyes to see what's going on here. Another one of my favourite theologians, St. Gregory of Nyssa. He lived in the 4th century in what's now modern Turkey. He says this. This is fast becoming one of my favourite all-time quotes. It takes a little while to get. Concepts create idols. Only wonder comprehends anything. People kill one another over idols, but wonder makes us fall to our knees. What's he saying here? Concepts. What are concepts? Like, I actually like concepts. I think in conceptual ways. It's quite just the way my brain is wired. So concepts are like ideas. They're abstract ideas. They can be ideologies. They could be religious beliefs, political beliefs. They're not flesh and blood things. They're like these ideas that we have. Concepts create idols. How does that work? Well, I don't know if you've ever been in like an online debate with someone. That's probably just my sin. You guys don't do that. But sometimes I've done that.
We've all
right?
watched you.
You watched me do it. Right? Because there's a real risk there, because you're not engaging with a human being. You're not seeing a face. And so it becomes a war of ideas. Right? It's a war of ideas. It's not incarnate flesh and blood. It's just these ideas. What happens is I become very attached to our ideas. Right? And they're not real things. They're just ideas. And we become so attached that we want to protect them. And eventually, if you take that far enough, we will kill to protect them. Now, that might sound a bit weird, but history would say that's exactly how we operate. If you look at nationalism, if you look at all the wars of history, it's often ideas people have. And I think differently to you, and I call this land Australia, and you call that country, and it's, what is Australia? A little just side hint there. Okay, there's obviously the bit of land, right? But Australia is a concept. It doesn't exist in reality. It exists in our shared imagination. To be Australian, to have the barbecue, to be outback, to be all of these ideas that we think goes along with Australia and being Australian, that's all in our shared imagination, right? And so it's very easy for me to build up an idol of that against some other group of people. And you put some conflict in there, all of a sudden, we're at war. Sounds like an extreme thing, but man, this is just what happens, right? This is what happens, human history. Gregory says only wonder comprehends anything. What is wonder? Wonder is the opposite of rigid conceptual thinking. Wonder is amazement, astonishment. Like, I see it, but I don't know. Wow. Right? It's like being like a child. You know, when a kid sees something and they're like, wow. And you're like, I've seen that so many times. No wonder going on to me, but they're astounded by it. That's wonder. And here, the interesting thing Gregory says is concepts, right? They create idols, but wonder comprehends. How does wonder comprehend? Because normally for me, wonder is about not knowing. It's about being amazed, and I'm not an expert, right? Someone has wonder, and then I'd come along and go, well, this is actually why that is so. You know, let me do a bit of mansplaining for you. It's like this, right? But what Gregory's saying, no, wonder is comprehending the reality of the situation. Here's a photo I took just up the road a couple of weeks ago. Now, that's just a photo, but when I saw that in the sky, wonder. Do you know, wonder. It was very easy to start, because these are different modes of consciousness, right? That's what we're going to get to. It's very easy to think in terms of wonder. Whoa, look at the beautiful clouds and the colours, and isn't God amazing, and isn't the world beautiful? It's easy to have a sense of wonder when you see something like that, all right? Now, you can go the other way, though, and you can still be critical and dismissive and go, oh yeah, it's a sunset. They happen every day. All right, move on. You could be like that, right? And you're going to miss all the beauty, aren't you? You're not going to comprehend it because you've conceptualized it down into a small thing that you think you fully understand. So you dismiss it. So I was thinking, can we have wonder over something that is not so easily wonderful? Can we see beauty in things that aren't necessarily just obviously beautiful? That's easy to have wonder at. Can you have a sense of wonder if you see this photo? Does that evoke a sense of wonder, or does straight away that evokes something else from you? If you're like me, as soon as I see that, I'm judging. I'm thinking smoking, pollution, littering. You know, it's not beautiful. It's not a landscape garden. So I took this photo as well when I was at a park in Sydney a couple of weeks ago. I was thinking about this. Can we possibly see beauty in everything? And I thought, well, as a thought experiment, I'm going to get my camera. I was sitting on a park bench. So I'm a little park in an industrial estate near the airport in Sydney. Not a beautiful place at all. Right? And I'm sitting on a park bench, and I thought, can I see beauty in absolutely everything? So I got my camera, and I didn't look at what I was going to take a photo of, and I just went, and took that photo right next to my foot. So I cropped my foot out of there. That was what was next to my foot. And I thought, can I have a sense of wonder over this? Could I see beauty in this? Is it possible? It's definitely more of a challenge than the nice, pretty sunset, isn't it? But it's going to require us to have the eyes of a mystic. It's going to require us to pause long enough and to be curious and to ask questions and to sit and to possibly even ask the Holy Spirit to open our eyes. So how could this be beautiful? So I sat there for a while and looked at it. And then I noticed this little green leaf over here to the right. And I just contemplated that leaf. And I thought, isn't it amazing that leaf has like thousands of these microscopic little capillaries running through it that like carry water into all the cells. And the cells have chlorophyll in it, this amazing thing that converts sunlight into energy, one of the only things on the planet. This is an amazing piece of nanotechnology here. Isn't that amazing? And so I start to open myself up to wonder. And then do you know what I thought? that leaf, it's fallen off a tree. So it's grown out of a tree. First, a tree has grown to produce that leaf. That leaf has now fallen onto the ground next to my foot. And potentially, I am the first and only human being to ever lay eyes on this leaf. Going a bit over the top? Now think about it. Now, well, it's not true because now all you guys are in on it. You've seen it as well. It was much more special before I showed it to you. But there's a leaf here. God's created this leaf just for you to see. What an extravagant act of beauty. What almost like wasteful beauty that God gives to us to create these things and allow us to see them. And then I saw the sticks falling and I'm like, wow, they're almost signifying time as they're on top of one another. Okay, that's the natural stuff. That's pretty easy. I can see wonder there. I can look at a tree and see wonder. What about these cigarette butts? I just had judgment, right? I just thought, this is ugly, it's littering. So I sat there, right? And I just said, Lord, open my eyes to see this. And you know what I saw? See this middle one in the orange? I sat there on this park bench. I sat there and all of a sudden, I saw a man sitting right where I was sitting. He's wearing like blue overalls with those high-vis stripes on them. He's just come from his workplace and he's smoking a cigarette. And I could see him smoking. And he's shaking. He's got a family at home that he's supposed to have gone home to, but he doesn't know how to go home yet. And he's smoking. He's got 3 children and a wife. His wife has got some health difficulties at the moment, but they found out she's pregnant. He's just come from his workplace and he's been told interest rates are going up, economy's struggling, we're going to have to let you go. And he's smoking. And he's shaking. And he doesn't know how he's going to go on. And then he puts the butt out and flicks it on the ground and walks away. And then I come here and sit here and realize I'm connected to a much bigger story than I ever imagined. If you take time and sit and watch, it's amazing what God will show you. So what we're talking about basically, between this idea of conceptual thinking, like shrinking things down, thinking we know what they are, to having a sense of wonder, we're talking about 2 different modes of consciousness. 2 different modes of consciousness. Really what we're talking about is dualistic thinking and non-dualistic thinking. Has anyone heard of those terms before? Not many. A couple have heard of those terms. Dualistic thinking, dual, 2 things, right? Non-dual, not 2 things, okay? So dualistic thinking is concerned with opposing categories, in and out, up and down, left and right, good and bad, okay? Dualistic thinking stops us seeing wonder. But we need to do this, okay? We need to get around in the world, we need to do this. So right where you're sitting right now, you have millions and millions of bytes of data entering your brain. You've got like millions of photons coming in through your eye and being translated into electrical signals. You've got sound waves coming through your ears, right? Way more than what your brain can process. So what your brain does to simplify things and try and get along in the world is it dumps like 90% of that and tries to focus on the things that it thinks are important, right? So right now, you will be getting sensations through nerves from your backside where you're sitting on a seat and from your feet where your feet are on the ground. But before I said that, you probably didn't even acknowledge that feeling at all. You probably weren't even thinking about that feeling at all because your brain's like, I can't deal with that all the time. You see this at home, right? How often will you be talking to your partner and they're this far away and you're talking and you know that the volume of your voice has gone into their ear, right? You know that's happened, and then you get to the end of the conversation and they're like, what? Sorry? And you're like, how did you not hear me? Right?
Imagine that, but in reverse.
Yeah, in reverse.
In reverse, I agree.
I just know that I'm
Yep.
telling that story because I know it. So, because the sound's going in there, right? But your brain's like, I'm thinking about something else. I'm fixated. I'm on a concept. I'm busy making an idol. Shh. Like, and so you don't listen, right? Your brain just discards that. Doesn't need it, because it can't deal with everything. So this happens when you're walking along. When you're walking, right? I'm walking forward. I'm taking a step. I'm getting all of this data coming in from everywhere. Your brain can't handle it. So what it does is it makes a model. In your brain, it makes a model and an approximation of what it thinks reality is. What's in front of you, sends the signals to your foot to go and put it there. Now, if that model is accurate, your foot will land on the ground and you'll be fine. If that model's not so accurate, you miss the step and you fall over. All right? Your brain is just making estimations and models all the time. Your brain's never seen raw daylight. If it has, you probably wouldn't be alive, right? Your brain, all it gets is data from outside. It's sitting in this dark, damp cave in your head, and it's getting all this data, and it's making a model and estimation of what it looks like out there. So to make sense of the world, we think in dualisms because we reduce it to make it simple, okay? Am I going left or am I going right here, all right? I'm teaching my children to drive at the moment, and they're doing very well. Sometimes I forget how much there is to learn when you're starting to drive. Like exactly how much there is to learn. And so we get to a roundabout, and my brain's had a lot of training in making a dualistic judgment. I know which cars to look for, where we go, which handle, boom, decisions made. But when you're learning, there's all this stuff coming in, and you've got to decide, what do I think about, right? So to get along in the world, we have to think dualistically most of the time. To get along in the world, we make categories, judgments, put people here, put people there. That's just how we make sense, all right? If we didn't do that, we'd just be a blathering mess all the time, okay? Problem is, we do this to people, and we put moral judgments and attachments onto our categories. So you go to the fruit shop, and you see an apple. You see a green apple, right? If a green apple is green, it's a good apple. If a green apple is slightly brown, it's a bad apple, all right? And then we even use that metaphor to talk about people. They're a good apple, they're a bad apple. To categorize things, we put moral judgments on people now. So that's healthy if you're wanting to eat not a bad apple, all right? But when you start to see people that way, it becomes more complex. Dualistic thinking is about separating things. To make sense, we separate. You're there, I'm here. That's right for you, that's left, right? You're good, you're bad. We separate and categorize. What is non-dualistic thinking? Non-dualistic thinking is both and. You can be a Victorian and a good person. Right? We won't just split those up completely. Both and. You can be more than one thing at once. There's complexity and subtlety. Non-dualistic thinking is about curiosity and compassion. Rather than making a judgment, that's a bad apple, I've seen that before, it's all of a sudden starting to ask questions, being curious. The painter Henri Matisse, anyone heard of Matisse? He said, the most difficult thing about painting a rose is forgetting every other rose you've ever seen. Because you have in your mind a model of what a rose looks like, which is very useful. You're walking through a garden, split second, boom, I see it, that's a rose. I've got a category in my mind, I can put it on that. That's a rose. But if you want to paint that rose, if you want to really see it, Matisse says you have to forget every rose you've ever seen. Because straight away, you know what you're going to end up painting? Not that rose, the model that's in your head. That's what you'll paint. Because you're making a projection of what you believe that to be, rather than comprehending it through wonder. When you forget all the other roses and look at that rose, all of a sudden you see the light and you see the shade and the way each petal, when you accept it for what it is and you don't say, is it a good rose or a bad rose? It is what it is. All of a sudden you see it in a different light. And you can paint what's actually there. Non-dualistic thinking is about interconnectedness. So, let's put this on a spectrum. Let's apply this type of thinking to people. Let's put dualistic up one end and non-dualistic up the other end, all right? And let's say that in the middle, neutral. You're walking down the road and you see someone. Neutral, this is where you don't see them as a threat, but you're not particularly having a crush on them. They're just someone, anonymous. It's just anonymous, doesn't really influence you. That's how it is. As we move up the dualistic scale, people become competitors. They go from being other human beings to being now competitors. And if we go all the way, they become enemies. Now, what are the forces driving people along this? Well, the first force, they're market forces and zero-sum resources. When you start to learn that the world's resources are limited, or if you're taught that they're limited and there's not enough for everyone, it's a zero-sum game. All of a sudden, for you to get enough bread, that means I won't have enough bread. So now I stop seeing you as another human being and I start seeing you as a competitor. And the market forces, our economic forces, our housing industry, our financial systems, they all push us this way up the spectrum. Then we get tribalism and nationalism. I talked about that before. Like when you have an idea that these are your people, those are those people, we're in common, you are a competitor at best, maybe going into an enemy if we keep going down the road. And then finally we head into retribution and scapegoating. If we go all the way down this, retribution and scapegoating. Scapegoating is when, to make peace in my group, we make it your fault. And we take the internal tension in our tribal group and we say, they're the reason. Their ethnicity, their race, their national identity is the reason we have these problems. That's scapegoat. That's putting the problem on the scapegoat who is the other. Okay? Now, what happens here is we don't see that person as another person at all anymore. All we see is a two-dimensional projection, a caricature of everything that we despise and hate. This doesn't have to be on international levels. This doesn't have to, like when I say enemy, I use the word enemy a lot. Maybe most of you don't think, oh, I have enemies like I'm shooting people. It's just someone you're in conflict with. We can have very subtle levels of conflict, and when that's happening, you don't see them anymore as a real person. You see all the things they do wrong, all the problems about them. You don't see, it's like the rose. You don't see the real rose. You see your projection of who they are. So Jesus comes into this at Christmas time. Galatians 4 says Jesus, just the right time, while we were still trapped under the elemental spiritual forces of this world, God sent his son, born of a woman, born under the law, under the same conditions as us, to redeem those who are under the law and adopt us to sonship. Jesus comes to redeem us from this. And he starts talking about categories of neighbour. Jesus is trying to pull us back this way, back from people who are enemies to competitors to sort of more neutral, and then he introduces this concept of a neighbour. What is a neighbour? A neighbour's not the person over the fence. The neighbour is whoever's before you and beside you in this present moment. The person next to you right now is your neighbour. This afternoon it'll be someone different. Whoever your neighbour is, at that time, is who Jesus calls us to love. And he does this by introducing a concept of do unto others. The golden rule, we've all heard this. Here's the scripture, Matthew 7. Jesus says, so in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you. That's 90% of parenthood when you've got siblings. It's like trying to teach kids. Just do to them, do to them what they want done to you. Right? And God's doing that to us all the time. By Hillel He's a Jewish rabbi. He says this. It's sort of flipped around in the negative sense. That which is hateful unto you, do not do to your neighbour. This is the whole of Torah. The rest is commentary. I love that. I love it. It's the negative sense. In Islam, they say something quite similar. It's the negative sense. It's like, don't do the hateful thing. Don't do to someone else what you would hate. Jesus frames it more positively and says, no, actually do to someone else what you would love having done to you. And he says, if we look back on it, this sums up the law and the prophets. Rabbi Hillel says, that's right, all the rest is commentary. This is what God's trying to pull us towards. So we've moved from neutrality towards neighbourliness with this idea of do unto others. And you have to understand, we've been raised, maybe if you go to Sunday school with your family, that's a very common concept. In many cultures in ancient times, that's a profoundly new concept. That's a paradigm shift. You mean they're not my enemies? Right? Remember, what did Jesus say? You may have heard it said, love your neighbour and hate your enemy. And Jesus starts opening up these categories of who your neighbour is. Then he introduces another concept, and this is linking on to what Lee talked about last week. And this is really where I'm going to land with you. We're going to go a bit further, but we're going to land with this concept. This is the idea of divine incarnation. Remember this text from last week, if you were here? The sheep and the goats. Remember, Jesus says, come to you my kingdom's prepared for you, because when I was hungry, you fed me. When I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. When I was in prison, you visited me. When I was sick, you comforted me. And the sheep say, when did we do this, Lord? When did we see you hungry and give you something to eat? When did we see you thirsty and give you something to drink? And the king, who is Christ, replies, truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did to me. This is where the Christian of the future will be a mystic. This is where you're going to need new eyes to see this. Holy Spirit, I pray you give us new eyes. Because the way we've always been raised to read that is, whatever you did to the least of these, you did for me. That's the way I was taught this verse. To demonstrate your love for God, go and do these good works. Right? That is worship. And that's true. Right? That's what I've been told. To demonstrate your love, go and do these things for me. But notice, he's not saying that. He doesn't even say, it's as though you did it to me. Like, it's as though, I'm going to pretend, it's as though when you're doing it to them, because I love them so much, it's like you're doing it to me. He doesn't even say that, does he? What does he say? When you did it to them, you did it to me. You did it to Christ in these people. So Jesus is saying, it's not like you did it for me, on behalf of me. No, I'm actually there. In the deepest level of incarnational solidarity that you can possibly conceive, Christ is in all. And when we love those who are unlovable, he is saying it, you're actually doing it to me. Here's a proof. This is interesting. A little tidbit fact here. Emoi, you have to ask Theano if that's the proper way to pronounce that, but emoi in Matthew 25:40, which is this word to. Tell me, is to a noun, verb, preposition? Preposition. Okay. So in Matthew 25:4, this preposition is in the dative case, which is technical, it's a grammar thing, right, for Greek grammar. And so this word could actually be translated as for me. So just the word alone, without the context, it could be the translators, because every time you open up a Bible, translators have sat down and they've had to make a lot of decisions over what words to use. The translators have had to go, well, this word, emoi, could be to or for. So what they do is they look in the wider context, which is the appropriate word to use. I won't go into it now, but if you look at this scripture, it's very evident which case to use. Okay, verses 35 to 36, 42 to 43, and 45. If you read them, it's clear. logic from just a sense of logic, no theology, no history, just the logic of the paragraph, it's clear that it is 2. Now, the NRSV, the King James Version, the New King James, the New Living Translation, the ESV, theologians like N.T. Wright would say, yes, it's 2. So in those Bibles, it says you did it to me. In the NIV, they made a different choice. They said for me. Now, the NIV is one of the most popular translations of the Bible in the world. Did they just make a mistake? Do they have second-rate translators? No. They did this because of the implications of writing 2. If you say for, you don't have to admit that Christ is in all. You can just do it on his behalf. If you say 2, there's theological implications. And so for a theological point, they decided to translate it as for, even though it is clear that Jesus is saying you're doing it to me. So if you come from more of the evangelical / reformed Calvinist point of view, you would be saying for, because you can't accept, because you probably adhere to total depravity, the doctrine of total depravity, and the idea that Christ would be in all is an abomination. You believe what you want. This is what he's saying, and we've got to wrestle with it. He's saying, you're doing it to me. Dietrich Bonhoeffer says this: Christ comes in the form of a beggar, of the dissolute human child in ragged clothes asking for help. He confronts you in every person that you meet. As long as there are people, Christ will walk the earth as your neighbor, as though one through whom God calls you, speaks to you, makes demands on you. C.S. Lewis says this: next to the Blessed Sacrament, C.S. Lewis was Catholic, so the Blessed Sacrament is communion because they believe that communion is actually the blood and body of Christ. Next to the Blessed Sacrament, your neighbor is the holiest object presented to your senses. In worship, we talk about coming into holy ground. Friends, you are on holy ground because you have a neighbor next to you. And in them is something that comes from God, created in God's image. We don't think like that about people. But if Jesus is in everyone, in a sense, right deep in the very core, right? You're being presented with something holy every time you come into contact with someone. So we've gone from neutrality. The forces do unto others have taken us to our neighborliness. There's this idea of divine incarnation, that Christ is in all. And then we move, so that's where I'm going to come back and we're going to land on this idea of seeing Christ in everyone. But I'm going to just take it one step further, just so you see it to the end. Right? This might be hard to conceive, but we'll just take it one step more, and then we'll come back and finish. We're almost done. You're doing great, guys. What's the time? 12. We're going to finish. So Jesus replied here. This will really spin you out if you get this. Jesus replied, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment, and the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these 2 commands." Again, a bit like the sheep and the goats, notice how Jesus doesn't say, love your neighbor as much as yourself. It's the way I was taught in Sunday school. You should love other people the same way that you love yourself. That's the measure. Same way I love myself, that's how I should love people. He's not saying love other people as much as yourself. He's not even saying love other people as though they were you. What does he literally actually say? He says love them as yourself. What does that even mean? Love them as yourself. In the same way that Christ is in all. He's saying, in a way, when you love other people, you're actually loving yourself. Right? It's like the sheep and the goats. When you honor other people, when you feed other people, when you be benevolent to others, you are being benevolent to yourself. And conversely, when you cheat other people, you cheat yourself. When you betray other people, you betray yourself. When you kill, what do you do to your own soul? So we've gone this whole loop. From Jesus has come to pull us back from being an enemy to a competitor to just at least neutrality, but then back into this idea of neighborliness, into what we would call Trinitarian oneness. Dualistic thinking separates people. Non-dualistic thinking connects people. There's nothing more non-dualistic than the Trinity, simply by definition. Jesus says this prayer in John 17, it's his farewell discourse to the disciples. He says, I pray, Father, that they would be one, just as you and I are one. As you are in me, Father, and I am in you, and they may be in us, so the world would believe that you sent me. See, we put people in categories of you're over there, I'm over here. You're this, I'm that. You hold that particular belief, I hold this particular belief. You're there, I'm here, that's good, this is bad. Dualistic thinking. And then Jesus comes on the scene and he says, may they all be one. As we are one, as the Father is in me and I am in the Father, may they be in us. And you go from like this sort of thing to starting to say, may they be in the Father as I am in the Father. And may they be one and may we be in the Father. May we all be one as I am in you and you are in me. As I am in you and you are in me, may they be one in us. And all of a sudden we're invited into the very heart of the Trinity. This dance for eternity, Father, Son, and Spirit. It's going to take new eyes to see that, that's for sure. The writer of Colossians says, the Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation, for in him all things were created. Things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers of authorities, all things have been created through him and for him. Gospel of John says, there is nothing that has been made that has not been made through him. All things are made for him, to him, and all things are held together in him. This mystery of Christ should fill us with wonder. He who comes to incarnate into the world in our brokenness, to restore us. He is in all things, and in him all things hold together. We're finishing up here, friends. This is the task for this week. When I remember that Christ is in all, then I began to look in the face of every person I encounter, searching intently for the hidden Christ who resides deep within them, even in the face of my enemies. This is going to take new eyes, and it's going to be an exercise in faith and trust to start with. So here's your exercise during the week when you're talking to someone. Go, Jesus says, when I do it to the least of these, I'm doing it to him. Somewhere behind all these layers of brokenness and hurt and pain, somewhere in there, deep, deep down, is Christ. And my task is to keep searching intently until I see that and find that, so that I can love that. Even my enemies, even the people that give me grief, I need to search into their hearts, trusting that I will find Jesus. He will reveal himself to me and give me a way to love them. Thomas Merton, one of my favorite writers, is a Trappist monk, first part of last century. And he wrote a poem called Conjectures of a Guilty Bystander in Louisville, a city in the United States, at the corner of 4th and Walnut, at the center of the shopping district. He has this epiphany. Now, I love this because this resonates so closely with me of my reconversion experience in a ghetto in Los Angeles. Being opened up in wonder to the people that were around me and God's love for them.
In Louisville, at the corner of 4th and Walnut, at the center of the shopping district, I was suddenly overwhelmed with the realization that I loved all these people, that they were mine and I theirs, that we could not be alien to one another, even though we were total strangers. It was like waking from a dream of separateness, of spurious self-isolation in a special world. This sense of liberation from an illusory difference was such a relief and such a joy to me that I almost laughed out loud. I have the immense joy of being man, a member of a race in which God Himself became incarnate, as if the sorrows and stupidities of the human condition could overwhelm me now that I realize what we all are. And if only everybody could realize this, but it cannot be explained. There is no way of telling people that they are all walking around shining like the sun. Then it was as if I suddenly saw the secret beauty of their hearts, the depths of their hearts, where neither sin nor desire nor self-knowledge can reach the core of the reality, the person that each one is in God's eyes. If only they could all see themselves as they really are. If only we could see each other that way all the time. There would be no more war, no more hatred, no more cruelty, no more greed. But this cannot be seen, only believed and understood by a peculiar gift.
We're going to finish here with a 1-minute exercise. This is your physio instruction for the rest of the week to go and do. that's it, friends. That's your physio appointment for the week. Go your exercise. Go search for Christ in every person. Search for Christ in yourself. Remember, the problem is not that you're a goat. The problem is that you forget you're a sheep. And you've got a good shepherd. Heavenly Father, I thank you for this time. Freely we have been given, and so you send us out into the world to freely give.